The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at the window of their private apartment. Her fingers traced the edge of the curtain as she watched groundskeepers tending to the gardens below. The normalcy of their routine felt almost surreal given the weight of what the family had been carrying for months. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He had just finished a call with his private secretary, and the tension in his shoulders was evident. Catherine turned from the window, her eyes immediately searching his face for any sign of news. "Any word from Papa?" she asked softly, using the affectionate term their children had adopted for their grandfather. William shook his head, moving to stand beside her at the window. "Nothing yet. The doctors are still running tests." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But we knew this day might come." The couple had been living with the knowledge of King Charles's diagnosis for several months now. What had started as routine medical checkups had evolved into something far more serious. The king had been characteristically stoic about his condition, continuing his royal duties with the same dedication that had defined his decades of service as Prince of Wales. Catherine remembered the day they first learned about the diagnosis. It was a crisp February morning, and they had been summoned to Clarence House for what they assumed would be a routine briefing about upcoming royal engagements. Instead, they found King Charles seated in his study, medical reports spread across his mahogany desk. "I wanted you both to hear this from me directly," the king had said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of gravity. "The doctors have found something concerning during my recent procedure." The word cancer had hung in the air like a weight. Catherine had reached for William's hand instinctively, feeling the slight tremor that ran through his fingers. For a man who had already lost his mother at such a young age, the prospect of facing another profound loss seemed almost unbearable. But King Charles had been quick to reassure them. "It's been caught early," he had explained. "The prognosis is positive, and we have excellent medical teams working on a treatment plan. I wanted you to know so that we can plan accordingly for any adjustments to our schedules." In the weeks that followed, the royal family had closed ranks around their patriarch. Public engagements continued, but there was a subtle shift in dynamics. William and Catherine found themselves taking on additional responsibilities, stepping in for events that would normally have been handled by the king. Now, standing in their Windsor apartment, Catherine reflected on how much their lives had changed since that February morning. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, had been told that their grandfather was unwell but receiving excellent care. They had handled the news with the resilience that seemed to run in the royal bloodline, but Catherine often caught glimpses of worry in their young faces. "Do you remember what he said about wanting to be transparent with the public?" William asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Catherine nodded. From the beginning, King Charles had expressed his desire to be open about his diagnosis. It was a departure from the traditional royal approach of maintaining privacy around health matters, but it reflected his understanding of the modern monarchy's relationship with the public. "He feels it's important for people to understand that cancer doesn't discriminate," Catherine replied. "That even someone in his position faces the same fears and hopes as any other patient." The king's approach to his illness had been remarkably philosophical. He had spoken privately to William and Catherine about seeing his diagnosis as an opportunity to bring awareness to cancer research and to show solidarity with the millions of people worldwide who were fighting similar battles. "I've been privileged to live a life of service," he had told them during one of their family dinners at Highgrove. "Perhaps this experience can serve others in a different way." William admired his father's perspective, but it didn't make the emotional weight any easier to bear. There were moments, usually late at night, when the children were asleep, when the full impact of the situation would hit him. The monarchy was built on continuity, but it was also built on family bonds that ran deep. Catherine had been William's anchor during these difficult months. Her calm presence and practical approach to managing both their public duties and their children's needs have been invaluable. She had also taken on the role of emotional support for the entire family, checking in regularly with King Charles and Queen Camilla, coordinating with medical teams, and ensuring that their household ran smoothly despite the underlying stress. The phone rang, interrupting their quiet moment. William answered immediately, recognizing the number as coming from Buckingham Palace. "Yes, this is William," he said, his voice formal despite the early hour. Catherine watched his face carefully as he listened to whoever was on the other end. She saw his expression shift from neutral attention to something more complex, relief mixed with concern. "I understand," William said after a few moments. "Yes, we'll be there within the hour. Thank you for calling." He set the phone down and turned to Catherine. "That was the king's private secretary. Papa wants to meet with us this morning. He's planning to make a public statement about his condition." Catherine felt her heart rate increase slightly. They had all known this moment was coming, but the reality of it still felt overwhelming. A public statement would change everything. Once the king spoke openly about his cancer diagnosis, there would be no going back to the private family struggle they had been managing. "How is he?" she asked. According to his secretary, he's determined and clear about what he wants to say. The medical team has given him the green light to move forward with the announcement. Catherine nodded, already mentally preparing for what the day would bring. She thought about their children, who would likely hear about their grandfather's statement through school friends or social media before they could be properly prepared. She thought about the public reaction, the media coverage, and the impact on the monarchy's day-to-day operations. But most of all, she thought about King Charles himself. Despite his royal title and the formal protocols that surrounded their interactions, he was also a grandfather to her children and a father-in-law who had welcomed her into the family with genuine warmth. "We should tell the children before we leave," Catherine said. "They should hear it from us before it becomes public knowledge." William agreed. They had learned from his own childhood experiences that royal children often knew more than adults gave them credit for, and it was better to be honest than to let them piece together information from fragments of overheard conversations. They found George, Charlotte, and Louis in the nursery, having breakfast with their nanny. The scene was perfectly ordinary: cereal bowls, morning cartoons playing softly in the background, and the comfortable chatter of children starting their day. Catherine felt a pang of protectiveness as she looked at their innocent faces. "Can we have a word with you three?" William asked, settling into one of the small chairs designed for the children. The siblings immediately sensed the seriousness in their father's tone. Louis, the youngest, stopped mid-bite of his cereal, while Charlotte and George exchanged a look that showed they were already preparing themselves for important news. "You know that Grandpapa has been seeing doctors because he hasn't been feeling completely well," William began, choosing his words carefully. "Is he going to be okay?" Charlotte asked, her voice small but direct. "The doctors are taking very good care of him," Catherine interjected, sitting down beside her daughter. "And Grandpapa is very strong and determined to get better. Today, he's going to tell everyone in the country about his illness," William continued. "He wants people to know what's happening so they can understand why he might not be able to do all of his usual royal duties for a while." George, as the eldest, seemed to grasp the implications most quickly. "Will people be worried about him?" "Some people will be worried, yes," Catherine answered honestly. "But they'll also want to support him and our family. Sometimes when people care about someone, they worry because they love them." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with each child processing the information in their own way. Louis asked if Grandpapa would still be able to read stories during their visits. Charlotte wanted to know if she could send him get-well cards. George, displaying maturity beyond his years, asked if there was anything he could do to help his father with royal duties. Their questions broke Catherine's heart and filled her with pride simultaneously. These children, who had been born into extraordinary circumstances, were learning to navigate complex emotional situations with grace and compassion. After ensuring the children were comfortable with the information and had been given permission to ask questions throughout the day, William and Catherine prepared to leave for their meeting with the king. The drive to Clarence House was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Catherine watched the familiar London streets pass by, thinking about all the times they had made this journey for happier occasions: family celebrations, holiday planning meetings, or simple social visits. Whatever he decides to say today, William said as they turned onto the mall, we'll support him completely. Catherine reached over and took his hand. Of course we will. That's what families do. As their car approached Clarence's house, Catherine could see the increased security presence and the subtle signs that this was not going to be an ordinary day. Media vans were already gathering at a respectful distance, their crews undoubtedly preparing for whatever announcement was coming. Inside Clarence's house, they were led to the king's private study, the same room where they had first learned about his diagnosis months earlier. King Charles was seated at his desk, but this time, instead of medical reports, the surface was covered with draft statements and communication plans. He stood as they entered, and Catherine was struck by how well he looked despite everything he had been going through. His treatment had been carefully managed to minimize visible side effects, and his determination to maintain his dignity and strength was evident in his posture and demeanor. "Thank you both for coming so quickly," he said, embracing each of them in turn. "I know this is happening rather suddenly, but I feel the time is right." Queen Camilla was also present, seated in one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace. She offered them a warm but slightly tired smile, and Catherine could see the strain that the past months had placed on her as well. "We're here for whatever you need, Papa," William said, settling into a chair across from his father's desk. King Charles nodded appreciatively. "I've been working with the communications team to craft a statement that strikes the right tone. I want to be honest about my diagnosis while also reassuring people that I'm receiving excellent care and remain committed to my duties as much as my health allows." He handed them a draft of the statement, and Catherine read through it carefully. The words were classic Charles, thoughtful, dignified, and genuinely considerate of how the news would affect others. He acknowledged his diagnosis clearly while expressing gratitude for his medical team and optimism about his treatment. "It's perfect," Catherine said after reading through the document twice. "It's honest without being alarming, and it shows your strength while acknowledging the reality of the situation." William agreed, noting that the statement struck exactly the right balance between transparency and appropriate royal reserve. "There's something else," King Charles said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone. "I want to record a brief video message as well. I think people deserve to see that I'm speaking to them directly in my own words." This was a more significant step than Catherine had expected. A written statement was one thing, but a video message would make the announcement much more personal and immediate. It would also inevitably lead to analysis of the king's appearance and demeanor, adding another layer of public scrutiny to an already difficult situation. But as she looked at King Charles, she realized that this was exactly the kind of thoughtful, people-focused approach that had defined his entire approach to monarchy. He wasn't thinking about protecting himself from scrutiny. He was thinking about connecting authentically with the people he served. Hashtag an emotional moment for William and Catherine. As King Charles speaks about cancer, the recording studio at Clarence's house had been hastily arranged in the king's private sitting room. Soft lighting had been positioned to create a warm, intimate atmosphere, while cameras were discreetly placed to capture the most natural angle possible. Catherine watched as the technical team made their final adjustments, marveling at how quickly such arrangements could be made when necessary. King Charles sat reviewing his notes one final time, occasionally making small pencil marks in the margins. He had insisted on writing the message himself, refusing offers from his communications team to draft something on his behalf. "These need to be my words," he had told them firmly. "People will know if they're not authentic." William stood near the window, speaking quietly with the king's private secretary about the timing of the announcement's release. They had decided to coordinate the statement with Buckingham Palace's official channels, ensuring that the news would reach the public through proper royal communication protocols rather than through leaks or speculation. Queen Camilla had excused herself to make some private phone calls to family members who needed to be informed before the announcement became public. Catherine had offered to help with those difficult conversations, but Camilla had insisted on handling them personally. "Some things require a personal touch," she had said with a grateful smile. "Your Majesty, we're ready whenever you are," the lead cameraman said respectfully. King Charles nodded, and set his notes aside. Catherine noticed that his hands were steady, showing none of the nervousness she might have expected from someone about to share such personal news with millions of people. "Would you like us to step out for the recording?" William asked. "Actually, I'd prefer if you stayed," his father replied. "Your presence is comforting, and I think it might help me speak more naturally." Catherine felt honored by the request. This was undoubtedly one of the most important and difficult moments of King Charles's reign, and he wanted them to witness it. She understood that their presence represented not just family support, but also the continuity of the monarchy itself. The recording began with King Charles speaking directly to the camera, his tone warm but serious. He began by acknowledging that he had something important to share with the British people and the Commonwealth, something that affected both his personal life and his role as monarch. "During my recent medical procedure, tests identified a form of cancer," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I have begun regular treatments, and I remain entirely positive about my treatment and look forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible." Catherine felt her throat tighten as she listened to him speak. Despite having known about his condition for months, hearing him say the word cancer publicly still carried tremendous emotional weight. She glanced at William and saw that he was watching his father with intense focus, as if willing him strength through sheer force of attention. The king continued by expressing his gratitude to his medical team and his determination to continue serving the country to the best of his ability during his treatment. He also spoke about his hope that his openness about his diagnosis might encourage others facing similar challenges. "In sharing my diagnosis, I hope to assist public understanding for all those around the world who are affected by cancer," he said. "My lifelong admiration for their tireless care and dedication is all the greater as a result of my own personal experience." What struck Catherine most was the complete absence of self-pity in his words. Even while discussing his own serious illness, King Charles was thinking about how his experience could serve others. It was a profound example of the service-oriented mindset that had driven his entire life. When the recording concluded, there was a moment of complete silence in the room. The technical team waited respectfully for permission to begin packing their equipment, while King Charles sat quietly, perhaps processing the significance of what he had just done. "That was beautifully done, Papa," William said, breaking the silence. "Your strength and grace came through completely." Catherine nodded in agreement. "People will be moved by your honesty and your focus on helping others, even during your own difficult time." King Charles smiled, though Catherine could see the emotional toll that making the recording had taken on him. "I hope so. I've always believed that the monarchy works best when there's genuine connection between the crown and the people. Hiding something this significant would have felt dishonest." As the technical equipment was removed from the room, the family gathered around the fireplace. Queen Camilla had returned from her phone calls, and her expression suggested that the conversations with family members had been emotional but necessary. "How did everyone take the news?" Catherine asked gently. "About as you'd expect," Camilla replied. "Concern, love, and determination to provide whatever support is needed. Your children's reaction was particularly touching. They wanted to know if they could visit more often to keep their grandfather company." This brought a genuine smile to King Charles's face. "Those children are remarkable. They have such natural empathy and resilience." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the King's communications director, who needed final approval for the timing and distribution of the announcement. They had decided to release the statement in the early afternoon, allowing time for the palace's communication teams to prepare for the inevitable media response. "We should probably head back to Windsor," William suggested. "The children will want to see us when they get home from school, and we should be available if they have questions after the announcement becomes public." Before leaving, Catherine approached King Charles privately. "Is there anything specific you'd like us to tell George, Charlotte, and Louis about how they can help or what they should expect?" He considered the question carefully. "Tell them that their grandfather loves them very much and that having their love and excitement about life gives me more strength than any medicine could. And perhaps remind them that this is a family challenge that we're facing together. The drive back to Windsor was different from their morning journey. The weight of knowing that the king's diagnosis would soon become public knowledge created a sense of anticipation mixed with relief. For months, they had been carrying this secret, carefully managing their words and expressions in public to avoid giving anything away. "I keep thinking about how different everything will be once this is public," Catherine said as they passed through the Windsor gates. "The media attention, the public reaction, the way people will look at him during appearances." William nodded thoughtfully. "But maybe we'll be better in some ways. No more worrying about slipping up or accidentally revealing something. No more careful word choices during interviews." They were greeted at home by their children, who had indeed heard rumors at school that something important was happening with their grandfather. The royal household's efforts to maintain privacy were admirable, but in the age of social media and instant communication, complete secrecy was nearly impossible to maintain. "Did Grandpapa make his announcement yet?" George asked as soon as his parents walked through the door. "Not yet," William replied, "but it will happen this afternoon. Are you feeling okay about everything we talked about this morning?" The children nodded, though Charlotte seemed thoughtful. "Will people say mean things about Grandpapa because he's sick?" It was a perceptive question that showed how much the children understood about public life and media attention. Catherine knelt down to Charlotte's level. "Some people might not understand everything about his illness, and they might ask lots of questions," she explained. "But most people will want to support him and send him good wishes. When people care about someone, they want to help however they can." Lewis, with the directness that only young children possess, asked, "Can we send Grandpapa one of my drawings to make him feel better?" "I think that would mean more to him than you know," Catherine replied, her heart swelling with pride at her youngest child's instinct to offer comfort. The afternoon unfolded with a strange mixture of normalcy and anticipation. The children went about their usual after-school activities, while William and Catherine monitored their phones for updates from the palace communication teams. They had been told that the announcement would be made at 3 o'clock, giving them time to prepare for whatever response might follow. At exactly 3 o'clock, Catherine's phone buzzed with a notification that the king's statement had been released. Within minutes, their phones were receiving calls and messages from friends, family members, and official contacts offering support and asking for additional information. The children were remarkably composed as they watched their parents field these communications. They seemed to understand that this was an important family moment that required everyone to be strong and supportive. "The early response seems very positive," William reported after speaking with the palace communications team. "People are praising Papa's honesty and expressing tremendous support for him and the family." Catherine felt a wave of relief. One of her biggest worries had been that the public might react with panic or lose confidence in the monarchy's stability. Instead, it seemed that King Charles's authentic and thoughtful approach to sharing his diagnosis was being received exactly as he had hoped. That evening, the family gathered for dinner in their private dining room. The children were full of questions about what would happen next, whether their grandfather would still be able to attend their school events, and how they could help support him during his treatment. "The most important thing we can do," William told them, "is continue being ourselves. Grandpapa doesn't want his illness to change how we live our lives or how happy and excited you are about things. He wants to see you growing and learning and having fun. And we can visit him more often," Lewis asked hopefully. "As often as his doctors say is good for him," Catherine confirmed. "He loves spending time with you, and that joy is actually very good for people who are recovering from illness." Later that night, after the children were asleep, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, finally able to process the day's events fully. The king's announcement had been broadcast on television and shared across social media platforms, reaching millions of people around the world. "I'm so proud of how he handled today," William said quietly. "It couldn't have been easy to share something so personal, but he did it with such dignity." Catherine agreed. What impressed me most was how he managed to make it about more than just himself. Even while talking about his own diagnosis, he was thinking about how to help other people facing similar challenges. They spent the evening reading through some of the public responses to the king's announcement. Messages of support were pouring in from world leaders, fellow cancer patients, medical professionals, and ordinary people who had been touched by his honesty and courage. One message that particularly moved Catherine came from a cancer charity, expressing gratitude that the king's openness would help reduce stigma around cancer diagnosis and treatment. When someone in his position speaks honestly about facing cancer, it helps normalize the experience for millions of other patients, the message read. He was right about this being bigger than just our family, Catherine reflected. His decision to be open about his diagnosis is already helping other people feel less alone in their own battles. As they prepared for bed, both William and Catherine felt a sense of cautious optimism about the path forward. The most difficult part, sharing the news with their children and the public, was now behind them. The focus could shift to supporting King Charles through his treatment while maintaining the important work of the monarchy. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, William said as he turned off the bedside lamp. But tonight, I'm grateful that we're facing this as a united family. Catherine settled into sleep thinking about the strength and grace that King Charles had shown throughout the entire ordeal. From his initial diagnosis through today's public announcement, he had handled every aspect with the dignity and thoughtfulness that had characterized his entire life of service. Whatever came next, she knew that his example would guide them through it. Hashtag an emotional moment for William and Catherine as King Charles speaks about cancer. The weeks following King Charles's public announcement brought a new rhythm to the royal family's life. Catherine found herself waking each morning with a mental checklist that had become routine. Check messages from the king's medical team. Review the day's adjusted schedule to accommodate any changes in royal duties, and prepare for whatever emotional needs her family might have as they continued navigating this challenging period. This particular morning was different, however. King Charles had requested that the entire family gather at Balmoral Castle for what he called a proper family weekend. It would be the first time since his announcement that they would all be together in a relaxed, private setting, away from the constant presence of medical appointments and public scrutiny. Catherine stood in the children's rooms at Kensington Palace, helping them pack for the trip to Scotland. The children's excitement was palpable. They had been asking almost daily when they could see their grandfather again, and the prospect of several days at Balmoral had them practically bouncing with anticipation. "Will Grandpapa be able to go fishing with us?" George asked as he carefully folded his favorite outdoor clothes. "We'll see how he's feeling," Catherine replied diplomatically. "But I know he's looking forward to spending time with you, whatever form that takes." Charlotte was packing what seemed like an entire art supply store in her small suitcase. "I want to have enough materials to make pictures for Grandpapa every day we're there," she explained seriously. Louis, meanwhile, had insisted on bringing his collection of toy cars, convinced that playing with them would help his grandfather feel better. Catherine smiled at the innocent certainty with which her children believed they could cure their grandfather through love and attention. William appeared in the doorway, phone in hand. "That was Papa," he reported. "He's already at Balmoral, and says the Scottish air is working wonders for his spirits." The family's journey to Scotland felt different from their usual trips to Balmoral. There was an underlying tenderness to their interactions, a heightened awareness that this time together was precious in ways that previous visits hadn't been. The children seemed to sense this as well, displaying an unusual level of thoughtfulness and consideration for each other during the long drive. When they arrived at Balmoral, King Charles was waiting for them in the main courtyard, and Catherine felt her heart lift at the sight of him. He looked well, perhaps a bit thinner than usual, but his eyes were bright, and his smile was genuine. Queen Camilla stood beside him, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from having loved ones gathered safely together. The children flew out of the car and into their grandfather's arms with their usual enthusiasm, but Catherine noticed they were slightly more gentle in their embraces, instinctively understanding that he needed to be treated with extra care. "Grandpapa," we brought you so many things," Charlotte announced, immediately launching into a detailed explanation of all the artwork and games she had packed specifically for him. "And I brought my car so we can play races," Lewis added, pulling a small toy vehicle from his pocket as evidence. George, with his growing understanding of adult concerns, asked quietly, "How are you feeling, Grandpapa? Are the doctors taking good care of you?" King Charles knelt down to George's level, his expression serious but warm. "I'm feeling much better. Thank you for asking. The doctors are excellent, and being here with all of you is the best medicine I could ask for." That evening, the family gathered in Balmoral's cozy sitting room for dinner. The castle's informal atmosphere allowed them to relax in ways that weren't possible during their London engagements. King Charles looked more at ease than Catherine had seen him in months, laughing at the children's stories and engaging with their questions about everything from castle history to wildlife on the estate. "Tell us about the treatment, Papa," William said during a quiet moment when the children were occupied with a puzzle. "How has it really been?" King Charles considered his response carefully. "It's been challenging in ways I didn't expect," he admitted. "Not just physically, though that's certainly part of it, but emotionally, it's forced me to confront my own mortality in a very direct way." Catherine appreciated his honesty. Throughout his illness, the king had maintained such a positive public demeanor that she sometimes worried he wasn't allowing himself to process the more difficult emotions that surely accompanied his diagnosis. "The strangest part," he continued, "has been the outpouring of support from people around the world. I've received thousands of letters from cancer patients and their families sharing their own stories and offering encouragement. It's been deeply moving and has given me a perspective I never would have had otherwise." Queen Camilla nodded in agreement. The mail room has been overwhelmed with good wishes. People from every walk of life, sharing their experiences and expressing their hopes for Charles's recovery. "Have the letters helped?" Catherine asked. "Enormously," King Charles replied. "Reading about other people's journeys with cancer has made me feel less isolated in this experience. There's a whole community of people facing similar challenges, and their courage and resilience have been incredibly inspiring." The children, having finished their puzzle, rejoined the adult conversation with their characteristic ability to shift seamlessly between their own world and the grown-up discussions happening around them. "Grandpapa, are you scared about being sick?" Charlotte asked with the direct curiosity that only children possess. Catherine and William exchanged glances, unsure how King Charles would handle such a direct question. But he answered with the same honesty he had shown throughout his illness. "Sometimes I feel worried," yes, he told her, "but I also feel very grateful for all the love and support I have from my family and from the doctors who are helping me get better. When you have people who care about you, it makes scary things feel less frightening." Lewis climbed into his grandfather's lap. "We care about you very much," he announced solemnly, "so you don't need to be scared." King Charles's eyes filled with tears, and Catherine felt her own emotions rising. The simple wisdom and pure love of children had a way of cutting through all the complexity and uncertainty to reach the heart of what mattered most. The next day brought glorious Scottish weather, and the family spent the morning walking through the castle grounds. King Charles moved more slowly than usual, but he seemed determined to participate in all their activities. Catherine walked beside him, matching her pace to his and enjoying their quiet conversation about the children's development and future plans for the monarchy. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately," he confided as they watched William teach George how to skip stones across a small pond. "Not just the formal aspects of royal succession, but the personal legacy we leave with our children and grandchildren." "What conclusions have you reached?" Catherine asked. "That the most important things we can pass on are values, not protocols. Kindness, service, resilience, and the ability to find joy even in difficult circumstances." He paused to wave at Charlotte, who was showing off her latest flower arrangement. "These children have all of those qualities in abundance." That afternoon, the family gathered in the castle's library for what became an impromptu storytelling session. King Charles had always been gifted at entertaining the children with tales of royal history, but today his stories took on a different quality. He spoke about ancestors who had faced their own challenges, monarchs who had led during wars, family members who had overcome personal struggles, and the long tradition of royal service that had sustained the family through centuries of change. Every generation faces its own tests, he told them. What matters is how we support each other and continue the work of serving others, even when things are difficult. George listened with particular intensity, and Catherine could see him processing the deeper meanings behind his grandfather's words. As the future king, George was already beginning to understand the weight of responsibility that would someday be his, but today's conversation seemed to help him see that responsibility as part of a proud family tradition rather than a burden. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, the adults remained in the library, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the peace of being together without external pressures. "I want to talk about the future," King Charles said, his tone becoming more serious. "Not because I'm pessimistic about my treatment, but because I think it's important to be prepared for all possibilities." William straightened in his chair, and Catherine reached for his hand. They had known this conversation was coming, but it still felt momentous. "The doctors remain optimistic about my prognosis," the king continued. "But this experience has reminded me that life can change quickly, and it's important for everyone to understand their roles and responsibilities." What followed was a thoughtful discussion about the practical aspects of royal succession, but also about the emotional preparation that would be necessary for William and Catherine to take on increased responsibilities. King Charles spoke about his confidence in their abilities and his gratitude for the way they had already stepped up during his treatment. "You've both shown remarkable strength and grace during this difficult time," he told them. "The way you've managed your own concerns while supporting the children and maintaining your public duties has been extraordinary." Catherine felt deeply moved by his words. The past months had indeed been challenging, requiring her to balance her roles as mother, wife, and future queen while managing her own fears about King Charles's health. Hearing his acknowledgement of those efforts meant more than she could express. "We're all stronger together," she replied. "That's what families do. They support each other through whatever comes." The conversation continued into the night, covering everything from practical arrangements for royal duties to emotional strategies for helping the children understand and cope with any future changes. Throughout it all, Catherine was struck by King Charles's remarkable ability to approach even the most difficult topics with wisdom and grace. When they finally retired for the evening, Catherine felt a deep sense of gratitude for the time they had been given together. The weekend at Balmoral had strengthened family bonds and provided crucial opportunities for honest communication about the challenges they were all facing. As she prepared for bed, Catherine reflected on the changes the past months had brought to all of them. King Charles's diagnosis had certainly been frightening and difficult, but it had also revealed the depth of love and resilience within their family. The children had shown remarkable maturity and compassion. William had stepped into increased responsibilities with grace and determination, and King Charles himself had faced his illness with courage and dignity that inspired everyone around him. "Tomorrow we'll return to London and all the regular pressures," William said as they settled into bed. "But I feel like this weekend has given us something important." Catherine nodded. "It's reminded us that no matter what challenges we face them as a family, and that love and support can sustain us through even the most difficult times." Outside their window, the Scottish landscape was bathed in moonlight, peaceful and eternal. Inside the castle, the royal family slept soundly, strengthened by their time together and prepared for whatever the future might bring. Hashtag an emotional moment for William and Catherine as King Charles speaks about cancer. The autumn leaves crunched beneath Catherine's feet as she walked through the gardens at Highgrove House, King Charles's beloved private estate in Gloucestershire. 6 months had passed since his public announcement about his cancer diagnosis, and today marked what his medical team was calling a significant milestone in his treatment journey. She found him his favorite spot among the organic gardens, carefully tending to late-season roses with the same meticulous attention he had always brought to his horticultural pursuits. The sight filled her with quiet joy. Throughout his treatment, King Charles had continued to find solace and strength in his connection to the natural world. "The pink roses are particularly beautiful this year," Catherine observed as she approached. King Charles looked up with a smile that seemed brighter and more relaxed than she had seen in months. "They've responded well to all the extra attention," he replied with gentle humor. "Rather like their gardener, I suppose." The comment reflected the optimistic spirit that had sustained him throughout his treatment. Earlier that week, his oncology team had delivered news that the entire family had been hoping and praying for. His latest scans showed significant improvement, and his treatment was progressing better than they had initially dared to expect. "William is on his way," Catherine reported. "He finished his engagement in Manchester early, so he could be here for the family meeting." Today's gathering was different from the difficult family discussions of previous months. Instead of planning for uncertainty and managing crisis, they were finally able to talk about recovery and the gradual return of full royal duties. King Charles had specifically requested that they meet at Highgrove because he wanted to share his news in the place that had always been his sanctuary. Queen Camilla emerged from the house carrying a tea tray, her face glowing with the kind of relief and happiness that comes after months of worry and careful hope. She had been King Charles's constant companion throughout his treatment, accompanying him to medical appointments and ensuring that he maintained proper rest while still engaging with the work that gave his life meaning. "The children are beside themselves with excitement," Camilla reported as she set down the tray. "Louis has been asking every 10 minutes when he can tell his friends at school that Grandpapa is getting better." Catherine smiled at the image of her youngest child, who had approached his grandfather's illness with the straightforward optimism that only children possess. Throughout the entire ordeal, Louis had never seemed to doubt that his grandfather would recover completely, and his unwavering confidence had been a source of strength for the entire family. William's car appeared on the drive, and soon he was walking toward them across the garden, his expression lighter than Catherine had seen it in months. The weight of worry that had been visible in his shoulders and around his eyes was finally beginning to lift. "How are you feeling, Papa?" William asked as he embraced his father. "Better than I have in a very long time," King Charles replied, his voice carrying genuine strength and energy. "The doctors are quite pleased with my progress, and I'm optimistic about what lies ahead." They settled into comfortable garden chairs, surrounded by the peaceful beauty of Highgrove's carefully cultivated landscape. Catherine noticed that King Charles looked healthier than he had since before his diagnosis. His color was good, his movements were more energetic, and, most importantly, his eyes held the spark of enthusiasm that had always characterized his approach to life and work. "Tell us about the medical update," William requested, though Catherine could see that he was already drawing his own positive conclusions from his father's demeanor. King Charles's expression became more serious as he shifted into the role of sharing important information with his family. "The oncology team met yesterday to review all of my latest test results and scans. The treatment has been more effective than they initially projected, and there are strong indicators that we've successfully addressed the primary concerns." Catherine felt her heart lifting as she listened to words she had been hoping to hear for so many months. The careful medical language couldn't hide the fundamental message. King Charles was going to be all right. "What does this mean for your treatment going forward?" she asked. "We'll continue with a modified protocol for the next few months, but it will be less intensive and should allow me to gradually return to a fuller schedule of royal duties," he explained. "The doctors want to be cautious and thorough, but they're confident about the trajectory." William reached over and grasped his father's hand. "Papa, this is incredible news. We've all been hoping and praying for exactly this kind of update." "I'm grateful beyond words," King Charles replied. "To the medical team, to all of you for your support, and to the thousands of people who have written to share their encouragement and prayers. This entire experience has shown me the power of community and shared hope in ways I never fully understood before. Catherine thought about the journey they had all taken together over the past months. The initial fear and uncertainty, the careful management of public communications, the way the children had adapted to their grandfather's illness with such grace and maturity. Now, finally, they could begin to envision a future where cancer was part of King Charles's past rather than his present. How shall we share this news with George, Charlotte, and Louis? Catherine asked. They've been so patient and understanding throughout everything, and I know they'll be thrilled. I like to tell them myself, King Charles said. Perhaps we could have them come here this weekend, so I can share the good news in person. I think they deserve to hear it directly from their grandfather. William agreed enthusiastically. They've shown such remarkable maturity throughout this entire situation. Charlotte has been creating artwork specifically to cheer you up. George has been asking thoughtful questions about your treatment. And Louis has been convinced from the beginning that you would beat this completely. Children often have wisdom that adults lose, King Charles reflected. Their ability to maintain hope and find joy even during difficult times has been one of the greatest sources of strength for me. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation turned to practical matters of royal scheduling and public communications. The king's improving health would allow him to gradually resume the fuller program of engagements and duties that had been modified during his treatment. The communications team will want to share an update with the public, William noted. People have been following your progress with such genuine concern and affection. King Charles nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to craft a message that expresses my gratitude for all the support I've received, while also continuing to advocate for cancer research and patient support services. This experience has connected me with a community of people facing similar challenges, and I want to continue using my platform to help others. Catherine admired his consistent focus on service even during his own recovery. Throughout his illness, King Charles had never lost sight of his role in supporting and advocating for others, and his approach had transformed what could have been purely personal struggle into an opportunity for broader public good. Queen Camilla brought out a folder of some of the thousands of letters that had arrived from well-wishers around the world. I thought you might like to see some of these, she said to William and Catherine. The response has been absolutely extraordinary. Catherine read through several of the letters, each one reflecting genuine care and support for the king and the royal family. There were messages from fellow cancer patients sharing their own stories of hope and recovery, from medical professionals expressing admiration for his open approach to his diagnosis, and from ordinary people whose lives have been touched by his example of grace under pressure. These letters represent so much more than personal good wishes, Catherine observed. They show how your decision to be transparent about your diagnosis has helped create connection and understanding around cancer treatment. That was always my hope, King Charles replied. If my experience could help reduce stigma or encourage others to seek proper medical care or support cancer research, then some good would come from a difficult situation. William looked through additional letters, noting the geographic diversity of the responses. Messages had arrived from across the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and from countries around the world where people had been following news of the king's treatment with concern and affection. The monarchy's role in providing stability and continuity has never been more clear to me, William said. During your illness, people weren't just concerned about you as an individual. They were invested in your recovery because of what you represent to them. As evening approached, the family moved inside Highgrove's cozy sitting room, where a fire was crackling warmly in the grate. The comfortable, informal atmosphere of the house provided the perfect setting for their important family conversation. I want to talk about the future, King Charles said, settling into his favorite armchair. Not just the immediate future of my recovery, but the longer-term implications of everything we've experienced together. Catherine settled back to listen, understanding that they were about to engage in the kind of meaningful family discussion that would help shape their approach to royal service going forward. This illness has taught me several important lessons, the king continued. First, about the incredible resilience and love within our family. The way all of you have supported me while continuing your own important work has been remarkable." He looked at William and Catherine with obvious pride. "You've both stepped into additional responsibilities with grace and capability that gives me complete confidence about the future of the monarchy." "We've learned from your example, Papa," William replied. "Your approach to this entire situation, the transparency, the focus on helping others, the determination to continue serving, has shown us what it means to lead with integrity during challenging times." King Charles turned his attention to the broader lessons of his experience. "I've also learned about the power of authentic connection with people. Being honest about my diagnosis created opportunities for genuine communication that wouldn't have existed otherwise." Catherine nodded, remembering the overwhelming positive response to the king's original announcement. "Your willingness to be vulnerable and honest helped people feel connected to you in a very personal way." And finally, King Charles concluded, "I've learned that meaningful work and loving relationships are the most powerful medicine of all. Throughout my treatment, what kept my spirits up was the knowledge that I had important work to continue and a family that loved and supported me unconditionally." As if summoned by the mention of family love, they heard car doors closing outside, followed by excited children's voices. George, Charlotte, and Louis had arrived for the weekend, their grandmother having brought them from London for the special family gathering. "Can we tell them the good news now?" King Charles asked with obvious anticipation. The children burst through the door with their usual energy, immediately seeking out their grandfather for hugs and eager conversation about their week at school. Catherine watched King Charles's face light up as he gathered them around him, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this moment of joy and celebration. "I have some wonderful news to share with you," he told them, his voice warm with happiness. "The doctors say that my treatment is working very well, and I'm going to be completely healthy again." The children's reactions were immediate and heartfelt. Charlotte threw her arms around her grandfather's neck. Louis began jumping up and down with excitement, and George smiled with the kind of relief that showed he had understood more about the seriousness of the situation than the adults had realized. "Does this mean you can come to my school play?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "And can we go fishing again?" Louis added. "Can you teach me more about being king?" George requested seriously. King Charles laughed with pure joy. "Yes to all of those things, and many more. We have lots of wonderful times ahead of us." As Catherine watched her children celebrate with their grandfather, she felt a profound sense of completion and new beginning. The difficult months of worry and uncertainty were finally behind them, replaced by renewed hope and strengthened family bonds. Later that night, after the children had been settled into their rooms and were asleep, Catherine found herself back in the garden with William, looking up at the star-filled sky above Highgrove. "When this all started, I wasn't sure how we would get through it," William admitted quietly. "But seeing Papa tonight, seeing his strength and joy and determination to keep serving others, I feel like we've all grown stronger." Catherine agreed completely. "This experience has tested us in ways we never expected, but it's also shown us what we're capable of when we face challenges together as a family." The future stretched ahead of them, filled with possibility and renewed purpose. King Charles would continue his recovery and gradually returned to full royal duties. William and Catherine would build on the experience and confidence they had gained during the difficult months. And the children would carry forward the lessons they had learned about love, resilience, and the importance of supporting family through both difficult times and celebrations. As they walked back toward the house, Catherine reflected on the extraordinary journey they had completed together. What had begun as a frightening diagnosis had ultimately become a story of triumph, not just over illness, but over fear and uncertainty. The royal family had faced one of life's greatest challenges and emerged stronger, closer, and more committed than ever to their life of service. The lights in Highgrove's windows glowed warmly against the autumn night, symbolizing the love, hope, and renewed strength that would guide the family forward into whatever the future might bring.